right. Well, this is Meadowlarkers 66. I'm not joined by Howard Bryant or Amin El Hassan, but we have Chris Whittingham here. And we have Allie Riley. But Allie, before I formally introduce you, we do this thing on Meadowlarkers where we have honorary captains where we flex our jersey number knowledge.
Oh,
So you don't have to take part, don't worry. But Chris, I'm assuming we're going to go with Mario Lemieux, the
Well, I
most
mean that
famous number 66.
that certainly is the hockey option, but since we are going to be talking about soccer football today, I did have to chuck in Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's the right back for Liverpool, who's one of the best soccer players in the world, who oddly, as a soccer player, wears number 66. So he is my honorary captain for the day.
Okay, we'll go with him. Allie, I assume you don't have any 66 prep since it's a difficult task.
no, and I didn't even of course I know who Trent Alexander-Arnold is, but I didn't realize he was number 66, and I have so many questions now.
It's an odd one, right?
Yeah,
You don't see that one in soccer.
No, usually, and some coaches have a whole thing about, you need to have the traditional numbers, or you need to have a number of the position you play. So there's definitely, there must be a story there.
All right, well, that voice is Allie Riley's voice. She's about to play her 5th World Cup.
Yeah.
Played at Stanford. Let's see if I got this right. Western New York Flash at one point, Orlando Pride, Chelsea, Bayern Munich. Currently playing for Angel City out in California in the NWSL. Puma athlete and captain of both Angel City and of the New Zealand national team. I mean, those are your soccer bona fides. Chris, I'm saying bona fides,
Bona
not
fides.
bona fides. Okay. But I mean, like, give us some spice to this, right? Like, what's your favorite TV show you're watching? Do you have a dog? Like, give us some, like, fill in those gaps for us quickly before we jump into other things.
Okay, well, I love cooking, so I'm passionate about all things food, and I have a cookbook coming out that I have written with my best friend, who lives in Orlando. We played together in Orlando and started this project over COVID, and now we're releasing a cookbook. Sadly, I had a dog with my partner. She was 16, so she lived an amazing life, but now we are currently pet-free, thinking maybe we could foster and see how that goes. And what was your first question?
Like your TV show you're watching now, or?
So I loved Wednesday.
Okay. All right.
Just finished that. And then I'm currently still catching up with Yellowstone. And that one really, it's just so intense. So I'll usually do like episode of Yellowstone and then the Mindy Project. Like I need to decompress after.
Counterbalance.
Yes. I cry a lot in like with everything. And so if anyone dies, or a horse or a person, anything like that in Yellowstone, it's like a lot. So then
and there's a lot of death.
Fun rom-com style comedy show.
What's the most surprising thing that's made you cry? Like, is there like a comedy show that made you cry?
Well, I pretty much cry every time I talk about Angel City, which I guess what is surprising is that I'm still doing it like a year later. And I was just talking to a couple of our new players and our rookie, Alyssa Thompson. She's 18. She was going to go to Stanford, decided to declare for the draft, and she came in, and like these players must be like, wow, I don't know if it gets them excited about playing for Angel City, if they're kind of like, maybe I should turn and run, because like I just talk about the club and I like start tearing up about all the impact we do in the community, like the meals we donate and the fans, and it's so overwhelming for me. And I guess I am surprised that it's still so meaningful like a year later going into season 2, but it makes me very, very confident that this is where I'm supposed to be.
Okay. And did you cry at Fleabag? Just throwing that one out there. Did you watch Fleabag?
I haven't watched Fleabag, but it's been recommended to me. So, but am I gonna cry a lot?
Well, yeah, but it's like it's such a funny show and smart. But there's a couple episodes where you get a good teary-eyed, not like murdered horses or anything like that.
Okay.
All right, well, we will get to Angel City because I have lots of questions about like the kind of the model that Angel City has created for almost all women's sports leagues, it seems. But before that, one of the news reasons we wanted to have you on, in addition to the upcoming Women's World Cup, was the news last week that Saudi Arabia Visit Saudi, like the tourism board the news came out that they might become one of the sponsors for the upcoming Women's World Cup, which is going to be in Australia and New Zealand. And they had been a sponsor in Qatar for the Men's World Cup. So it's like there's a little bit of precedent there, but then Australia, New Zealand, their national team, their boards kind of come out with statements saying that they wouldn't support this. So can you kind of take us through like that news, your reaction, the world of women's sports reaction as well?
Yeah, of course. So when that news came out, I kind of was hoping it was a rumor that couldn't possibly be true. And then I'm checking more and more websites and seeing this. And then, of course, got the call from not only our CEO, but also our Players Association to talk through what the news and what it looks like. And, they have requested for a response and clarification from FIFA. We haven't received it yet. I think a lot of news outlets are also hoping to get some clarification, but I think just it brings up a lot of just stress and kind of just concern, because I think off the back of the Men's World Cup, so many of us were feeling like when the Women's World Cup comes around now in 6 months, we will show what a tournament really should feel like and look like, and that women's soccer is leading the way in terms of inclusivity and, working towards more diversity, collective, the unity between players across national teams. It's something we saw in the NWSL, the collective group, with the abuse you were seeing or that was coming to light in the league. And it felt like, we were disappointed in some of the ways that different parts of the Men's World Cup were handled, but also saw it as an opportunity with now how far the women's game has come and how many people I am confident will be watching this tournament to really speak out about what's important to us and not shy away from, holding big organizations accountable. So what I didn't account for was, actually that could be out of our control with having a major sponsor come in. And I think, with the Netflix documentary coming out, and sports washing has been around for so long, but just starting to talk about it. And I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, without more information, is this going to, take away from the tournament? Is this going to turn other potential sponsors away? How are we as a collective with so many, I pride myself on being an ally. I'm still learning, but for the players who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, how is Visit Saudi aligned with their lives and who they are and who we are as allies? And is this really aligned with the countries of New Zealand and Australia? I think it's even separate than, of course, the other participating countries, but we feel this opportunity to show what the host countries stand for and what our cultures are about. And historically, looking at New Zealand, we're very proud of women, how we have progressed women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights and human rights. And so I think this just, more conversations need to be had, but my initial reaction was just shock and disappointment. And then also doing research, trying to get information. I think that is really important. You of course have an emotional reaction. I work really hard on having empathy, and I do think you need to fight hate with love, and looking into what progress has been made in Saudi Arabia. And I think we can acknowledge that there has been progress. However, is, having a women's national team in Saudi Arabia, is that, again, another attempt? If Saudi Arabia were to host a World Cup, a Men's World Cup, then if they get that bid, then will they care about the women's national team anymore? Is this part of a tactic, or is this genuine that the country's going in a direction? I think, we need to see evidence of the country progressing in these areas before feeling comfortable having a sponsor like this. And I think too, it's just a shame that when the women are so outspoken, that there was no conversation, that even not of course the players I think would have been great, but even just the participating nations, the host nations, to not have to be blindsided by news like this, I think that speaks volumes, with them maybe FIFA knowing that it wouldn't be received so well, so just kind of doing it. But like I said, we don't have more information, but that's just, my reaction to the potential and the news. And I think it brings up a lot of issues and conversations about the future of sport and sponsorship. And, I think everyone can do better, and FIFA can do better.
I think it's worth noting, as it relates to this particular story, why Saudi Arabia are doing this, because if you look at sort of their history in football, it actually was not terribly significant until they got into a political battle with Qatar, who were sort of running football for a while, and a lot of things are going through them, and obviously they hosted the World Cup, and Saudi Arabia and their crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, viewed it as an opportunity to grow their own power profile, and actually they have presented a number of huge proposals in front of FIFA, including basically underwriting their Club World Cup on the men's side to the tune of $3 billion per edition of the tournament, and they want to insert all kinds of things that is sort of their influence. They formed a power block that actually helped the U.S. get their World Cup votes over the line to host 2026. They want to host in 2030. They own Newcastle of the Premier League. They are spending all kinds of money. And it was interesting in reading an article in the New York Times that it's not just about sports washing in the traditional sense, which is basically to make your country seem more palatable through the vehicle of sports. For them, they actually view it as a measure of attaining power in the world. It's almost even a bit more sinister than plain old sports washing. And in introducing that, I wanted to ask you, when as a women's soccer player, and I think it's really cool and interesting the degree to which women's soccer players have stood for something and view their role as athletes as much as activists. When you're constantly confronted with this, as well as the U.S. soccer story and other things that have happened, how often are you just sort of made tired and just like, really, we can't just have a World Cup, and the country that I play for was going to be so cool to step out on that field, I have to be an activist about this too?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it is exhausting, and it's very disheartening. And that's why I am a very positive person. My nickname is Smiley Riley. And I really try to balance the news and the issues and these fights that we're having every single day with looking at the progress we have made. And again, there's so far to go, but looking at something like the minimum wage in the NWSL, it has changed, having finally a union, signing a CBA. In New Zealand, we have an equal CBA with the men, the news of the US women's team. So we are making progress, looking back at, the celebration of Title IX and how much sport has changed. So I think, yeah, I try to take that as kind of fuel to give me energy to keep pushing, because I think if we do look at how much of our energy as professional athletes, as women, is being spent on not soccer, it's actually overwhelming. And that's why I argue that we should be paid more than the men, because we are actually doing so much work. But yeah, I guess that is the dream, is that one day all of this will be a choice, because we'll have come so far, the gender gap, with diversity, with inclusion, with equity, that standing up for a campaign or an initiative would feel like just a choice. Like, for me, it's not a choice. I have to do it. I have a responsibility, and I have a privilege of, being a cis, straight, white passing woman who is able to save money because of the salary that I'm on, to use my voice and my platform to fight for change. And I am happy to do that. And I think when I do look at how far we've come, I'm able to take that as energy to keep going. And it's something I will do while I'm a player, when I'm after I retire, because again, we have so far to go. But I'm very encouraged by seeing former players who are owning sports teams like Angel City, starting companies, media networks. I mean, again, these foreign players are fighting the fight through these different venues, but it gives me, again, more energy because it is exhausting.
Yeah. The hidden cost, right? The hidden cost of being a female athlete. So will you give us, just for us, Whitty, I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for me. Like, I know the Women's World Cup is in Australia and New Zealand, but I don't know the backstory on how they got it, who put the bid together, what those countries do to support women's soccer or not, like the places it's been and where it's going. Can you share with us the backstory of that bid? And you mentioned that New Zealand has the CBA between you and the men's side is equal, which I didn't know that, which sounds like that happened even before the US women got that done. But can you kind of share with us what this bid means and where the state of women's soccer is in Australia and New Zealand?
Yeah, I think they're in two very different places. Australia is much bigger and has larger economy, and I think the progress they've made in the past decade. I started playing for the national team in 2007, so it's been a while, and seeing the exponential growth, I think there is very encouraging. You have their players playing in some of the top leagues around the world. Sam Kerr is arguably one of the best players in the world, starring for Chelsea. I think they having a professional league has really, really helped them. And again, that's something we're seeing now. Having a domestic league is really important for growth, because the little girls can see their idols, can start dreaming. That's why it's been so important for me to have a team in Los Angeles again, because you have to see her to be her. And I think we're really far behind that in New Zealand, which is why having the World Cup is such a huge opportunity. And when we look at our equal CBA, what that means financially for us is not, doesn't really pad my wallet in the same way it has for the US women. So, we don't make money. We get like a stipend or a per diem. But we do have in place where we get a share of the prize money when we play in tournaments. And that is the same as men in terms of travel. It's the same as the men. Unfortunately, right now, I think it means that neither team is able to fly business. So we're the same, but it's not necessarily like at the standard that we'd like to be in order to, compete at our best. And this, of course, has to do with investment. I'm not trying to throw the federation under the bus. This is why, again, it's such an opportunity to have the World Cup. And for us, with the tournament being expanded to 32 teams, this is a chance for us. We have never won a game at a World Cup. We want to win a game. Our goal is to get out of the group. And if, again, back to FIFA, if we can push for more prize money, it will change the federation. It will change the future of women's soccer in New Zealand. It would change the lives of my teammates. And so for us to get this bid, I'm trying to remember when the two countries kind of joined together, but it came down to 3. And then, oh my gosh, it was the middle of COVID when we got the news. Of course, I was just bawling my eyes out because it was such a huge win for us. And I think too, what is so beautiful and unique about the two countries is our indigenous cultures. And this is a chance, again, if done in the right way. And again, this is putting a lot of faith into FIFA. If this is done in an authentic way, to really share this rich culture and history of these two countries, without appropriating culture, but just to educate and to celebrate and to honor. I think that is something really unique about having it in these, and also two countries the first time. Yeah, and I think it's cool that we're setting the precedent, because of course we know the men's World Cup will be shared among the 3 countries. So it is for New Zealand, like, we can't miss this opportunity. And it's more than what the players can do. I think the players on the Football Ferns are trying, getting at the best clubs they can be on, putting in the work every day so that we can do well on the field. But it's like, what is FIFA going to do now? What is our federation going to do? How are we going to make sure that We engage with all communities. So every girl in every corner of the country feels that she has access to come see a game, to potentially engage with us. There's so many things, and it's scary because we're so close to the tournament now, but it's like all hands on deck right now with our media team, and with there's a legacy program, and we're supposed to get some news, I think positive news about kind of all the initiatives and where funding is going, and what changes are being made. I think we're having non-binary bathrooms put into stadiums. I think it covers a lot of different areas, but this is a huge chance to make a big difference and a big impact in New Zealand.
So, Ali, one of the things that, and you mentioned it there in your answer, that causes a disparity between men's and women's football is, or at least on the international level, is the difference in prize money. And getting back to the topic that we sort of started with, which was the investment of Visit Saudi into the Women's World Cup, is there almost a morality that has to come with that money? Because in theory, if Visit Saudi are paying a bunch of money into the World Cup prize pool, that is more money to go around for federations. And how much are you sort of considerate of, not even just in this instance, but in ownership groups that take over in the NWSL and other women's leagues around the world, and corporate sponsors, the morality or their dedication to causes that are in line with your causes? Or is there going to have to be a certain point in which the women's game becomes such a big enterprise that they're going to be big corporations or sovereign states that want to invest in women's football that might not be completely in line with your ideology?
This is such a good question. And I was just talking on Morning Brew about this, because even us as individuals, when we as players need to supplement our income as athletes, we get presented with influencer kind of type contracts, or will you promote this? And we need the money. And so it's such a good question. And that's why I'm like, I really try to have empathy, because we're all coming from different places and different experiences and have different needs. And I think that what is so clear for someone who is able to invest their money, own property, is going to be very different than someone who's like, I need the extra $1,000. I'm supporting children. My national team barely gets to play games. Like, any funding will help. And that's unfortunately like where the women's game is. And so when it comes to this tournament, I guess my perspective is, and a lot of this comes from Angel City, who is so intentional with the sponsors and the investors and the ownership groups. And it really opened my eyes. I hadn't thought that much about this before, that I see women's sports as being such a good investment, that if any of these organizations or brands or companies actually have the right person in their ear saying, like, this isn't a charity anymore, this actually is good for you. Half the population is women. Like, why would you want to isolate that audience? Why should we need to take a sponsorship from an organization that doesn't align with us, because there should be 5 others knocking at the door, desperate to be the major sponsor of this tournament? Again, I know that's not the case, but like, for me, I wish it was like that, because it's so clear when I look at the product, when I look at how much it's growing, when I look at how many people are going to tune in to this World Cup. So yeah, it is very, very complex. And I think that's where FIFA, when the people at the top of FIFA making the decisions don't view women's sports the way I do. So when a deep-pocketed sponsor comes around, it's not really, it's like, oh, we'll need this one because people don't care about women's sports. It's not actually thinking through, seeing it through the lens that I see it. So I think, yes, it is a really tough question. And it's something that we as women athletes are dealing with on a daily basis, because we need the money, and you don't always feel like you have time or the luxury to be like, maybe I won't take this $1,000, which can go really far, because it might be limiting future opportunities, or it's not exactly what I stand for. Like, doing a deep dive into the company. Like I don't want to know what I don't know. And yeah, I think too, it can like blow back in our faces a lot, because you do support people. Don't care when you look at social media. They don't care about getting to know you or why you've done certain things. But if you say something or do something or promote something that isn't aligned then with other people, you get, for better or for worse, you get a lot of backlash on that too. So it's a tough space to operate in. And especially when, again, we don't make a lot of money.
Yeah. You're like, bottom line, we don't make a lot of money.
Yes,
yeah.
Again.
Like what I'm hearing too, and it's something we have talked about in the past on this show, is like the different models that work or don't work in women's sports. And, like you look at the FIFA model for like what works for them selling the men's World Cup, and they only have right now, at least from an outside perspective, it seems like they have their model where they have like, Coca-Cola, and in this case, Visit Saudi, and, Adidas, and then they all pour tons of money into it. And then you look at the Angel City model, which is like, actually, we need to rewrite and restructure this, and we're going to have a lot of women coming in, and men too, but like, and bring a lot of visibility, but there's going to be a lot of them to help us grow this from the ground up. And I think you're kind of working and struggling between those two models right now. Because like, I can't imagine you have a ton of trust that like, oh, don't worry, FIFA will do right by us.
They'll do the right and moral and just thing.
Yeah, you know what? It's in FIFA's hands.
That no one ever.
Exactly. Like, I'm trying to figure out like exactly what the question in there is, but like, I feel like you must bounce back and forth between like, you've got Angel City over here. You probably have a ton. It sounds like if you cry all the time talking about them, you have a lot of trust in what they're building. And yet over here, you're like, should we take $20 million from Visit Saudi? Because maybe a couple 100,000 of that is going to go to growing the Ferns program.
Yeah.
I can just see, like, I don't even know, as somebody who came up in women's sports, like what the right answer is. I'd be interested, Chris, in kind of what, Allie, if I put you on ice here for a second, what your thoughts are on like, I don't even know what the money is that Visit Saudi is putting on the table, but like, does women's sports take 20 million from Visit Saudi and like go grow women's sports in your mind?
In my mind, I just think that, having worked a little bit in women's soccer, I've worked in the NWSL for a few years doing games, and there just is something different about this particular sport where the athletes that play women's soccer stand for something. And I think it's important that an organization like FIFA, much as we doubt them, and as much as it is sort of ruled by white men, and we talked last week about the Super League documentary and how everyone in a boardroom is essentially white men, they're not making conscientious decisions in the same way, but they ought to. The one thing that is just sort of unavoidable, and there was another story in the news this week in the world of soccer with Manchester City, we talked about on the Le Batard Show, where sovereign states are getting involved in the game, and they just have more money to spend. There's a report, we're recording this earlier in the week, and there's a report that the Qataris are interested in investing in Manchester United. It's sort of unavoidable, the influence of these states that have enormous amounts of money and also want to invest it in things that are a bit more sustainable than digging more holes in the ground and finding more oil, because that's where their money comes from. So they're trying to invest in more sustainable things, and they've turned their attention to sports. And the thing that's kind of most difficult for me to square is it would make sense for the Saudis to invest in the men's World Cup, but it's just so bizarre given not only their record, but also their view towards women, that, like, as Ali mentioned, going to a soccer stadium was illegal for a woman as recently as 2017. That law was changed 4 years ago. Yeah. And so you see and they still live in a guardian system where, for the most part, women have all of their decisions made for them by men, and they can report domestic violence incidents. And the view towards modernizing is, as Ali mentioned, slowly crawling towards justice, but it's still very far away from what I think anyone who's in that sport would view as fair. So it's just bizarre that they would be interested. But the one thing that is sort of unavoidable in the world of soccer, particularly from a men's standpoint, and I guess now increasingly from a women's standpoint, is money from oil states is going to come in. It's going to play an enormous role in this sport for years to come. And I think it sounds callous to say, but I think women could be benefactors from this. And you know, I don't want to I don't want to from my perch say this is what you should do, but it's sort of what you could do. What can you do with that money if it's sort of unavoidable anyway?
Okay. Ellie's like, let's leave it there on that one. No.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, and again, if this is out of our control, it is then maybe saying, if this is happening, how do we make the most of it to then help women? And I just would love to see on the back of this more changes happening in Saudi Arabia and not just, the rest of us that could benefit from it.
One thing having you on, I wanted to ask, because you've played in the Premier League, do you think that England winning the Euros will be their 99ers moment?
I really think it could be, because I think again, we're at such a different place in women's sports now, so it's really hard to compare it exactly, because I think a lot of investment went into the team first, and then now they saw success from it. Right. And that is that's the ideal, I think that is, again, going to encourage other federations to invest, because you saw almost a direct result from it. And so I think, again, when countries and federations are positively rewarded for their investment, it's just going to help the women's side. But again, the Euros, without it being a global tournament, they're going to have to now back this up at the World Cup. And it's so exciting. And this is, again, to have more than one team in the conversation, seriously in the conversation for who is going to win the Women's World Cup is new. And it's only good, and I am American, but of course, I'm football friends till I die when it comes to women's soccer. So being involved in women's soccer in the US and very close with the players on the US national team, but having good friends playing for Germany and Sweden and England, other teams that are now being considered favorites. Of course, I think US still takes the top spot. I was looking at some odds. But I think it is really exciting. And again, I from playing for a team that we're trying to almost kickstart the beginning of our development, we're behind, but that's where you're look, they put investment in and look what's happened. You can't ask us to perform well and then invest in us. This is the most tired, this age-old argument where it's you eat what you kill. And I'm if I hear another man say that.
And Kate, to your point about the 99ers moment, I actually think with England, it was back in 2015 when they won bronze in Canada. Because that sort of led to the beginning of that investment. It was all of a sudden major media partners wanted to get involved. And Ali, you can speak to this because you played in Europe a fair bit. The investment now that's coming from the biggest clubs in the world, frankly, as a U.S. soccer fan, has me concerned because major European countries that have traditionally been good at soccer are coming for our stuff as it relates to America, because, Chelsea invests big money. Arsenal invests big money. Lyon invests big money. Paris Saint-Germain are now investing. Bayern Munich, Barcelona, and on and on and on. All these big European clubs, and frankly, their footballing infrastructure is better than ours. It almost by default, it almost has to be. Mm-hmm. And so I honestly, heading into this next World Cup, I would take the field over the U.S. For the first
hurrah for the U.S., you think?
I mean, the U.S. is always going to be a strong competitor, but as these countries get really, start to have that investment, and it's basically been 8 years that investment has existed. So as it becomes generations, and professional soccer players in Europe can have profitable careers and make good money. And I saw in this winter transfer window, there was one club that offered $600,000 for another player, which would have set a world record. And I believe it was to Arsenal, and they said no. So you're seeing big money getting thrown around, but I mean, it's still relatively small as relates to the men's game. Ali, I would just ask you, having been in Europe during some of that period, how much has the game grown over there, and sort of how what's the trajectory of the England, the Spains, the Italys, the Germanys, these big soccer nations that are now starting to put their investment behind the women's game?
Yeah, again, I think you're seeing a direct return when you're getting the best players, you have the best resources. And again, we talk a lot about salaries, but conditions and having access to fields. And you're still seeing issues with that. You know, you saw some games that were canceled like super late. The men play on heated grass fields. The disparity is still huge. But I think when you're looking from women's leagues to women's leagues, comparing the women's side, I think just when clubs finally, again, who's sitting in the boardrooms of these clubs are finally like, like we could win some trophies. And maybe if our men's team doesn't win a trophy this year, what are we going to splash all over the website? Well, we also have a women's team and they're winners, you know? And I just think it, again, is like mutually beneficial. But when we get back to, it's not always the salaries, and not every player is making huge bucks. Not every player is being, you know, having these transfer fees between clubs. But it's like the facilities, it's the medical treatment you can receive and have access to. There's so many other pieces to this. And, you know, in Sweden, the league there does not have this type of investment, but that's the first team that I've played for where FIFPro came in, because one of the former Swedish national team players, she started working for FIFPro. So Sweden was very in touch with the Global Players Union very early on. And they were like, you know, the union, the Players Association in Sweden, you have rights, you have protections if you have a baby. I had never thought of that, never heard anything about it. And you're seeing now Sarah Björk was able to have this suit against, or go through this legal procedure against Lyon because of how she was treated when she got pregnant. Like, so there are so many things to consider when we talk about the growth and players' welfare. And that's where, again, I think when you have access to the resources that the men's clubs have, plus the type of money they can pay, you are seeing the game. I mean, you watch some of the Champions League games with that kind of competition. The Women's Super League in England is so competitive. And that's where you have players now being able to choose different countries they can play in, different clubs. Not that long ago, when I first started playing, there was Wolfsburg, Frankfurt, you know, Arsenal had done the like quadruple years before, but there weren't a lot of recognizable women's teams that would pay a lot of money or have good resources. And now it's so different. I think what we want to be not wary of, but just conscious of is like, now there's the disparity between the men and the women, but there's also a huge disparity between women's clubs now. And it's kind of like, how can we work? I'm part of FIFPro's Global Player Council. And it's like, how can we make sure that some teams and women and players and leagues aren't getting left behind? Because I think it is so important that there is a minimum global standard, and that's something that's still being worked on.
And Allie, for listeners who aren't as like deep in the women's game, and actually this is something I'm curious about too. I look at, like, you know, when I see something on Instagram of like, you know, a women's player I know going to Chelsea or going to Arsenal or going to Tottenham, it looks so sexy to me because I'm seeing all of the branding that I've seen for generations. What is it about playing in the US and the NWSL, if there is something, a thing? Like, what allure does the NWSL have when you're talking about the infrastructure that might exist in these big name clubs that we know from their men's legacies? Like, how does like a female athlete balance that choice?
So I think, again, when you take into not just the salaries, but everything around that, around the athlete experience, that is something where the NWSL, and I do think that in the United States, of course, we have a lot of issues with how women are treated here, but I think women athletes are celebrated in this country more than maybe any other country. And the success we've had with women athletes on the international stage, I think the sponsorship opportunities for players, I think having now our Players Association, which is so good, and just I trust them and I feel protected and I feel safe. And again, that's not without mentioning what has happened with coaches in this league, but now having this organization that is helping us, and the women who are outspoken in this league, I think probably following the example of the US women's national team that has been so successful. I just think that you have such a voice in this league, and that maybe can't pay the bills, but goes pretty far when thinking about living the life that you want to live and being able to be open about your identity, to be able to make an impact in communities that are important to you. And I think as well, because the teams here, for the most part, aren't associated with a men's team, and men's soccer in this country is growing, which is great, we are not competing for that spotlight in the same way you are in Europe. And that was something that I really noticed. It was so awesome to go to Chelsea, the media team. I was getting paid more, the facilities, but that disparity stares you in the face every single day when I took the train. I was too scared to drive on the other side of the road. I took the train to the facility, and you walk by the men's facility and their heated fields. And, when it snowed, we didn't have a gym to use and we didn't have a field to use. And so, and again, this was 2018. A lot has changed since then, and I can't speak to how it is now, but I know it's not the same for the men and the women. But I think that's something like being at Angel City, who made the very intentional decision to not be, part of a men's club, and a lot of the teams, even if they are, like, you feel like these clubs like stand on their own 2 feet and have sponsors who are sponsoring the women and fans who support the women, and you just feel like we are the top of the top when it comes to soccer in this country. Again, I think it's because of how successful and amazing the women's national team has been, but that is pretty refreshing when you think about how it is to be in a male-dominated industry, like pretty much anywhere in the world, and in any industry, that it is very unique to the US, where our women's soccer team is the best and has done better than the men, and now have this equal pay and are getting back paid. And then it's just set the tone, I think, for the league. And the lifestyle that you have here, I just think is so different than in Europe. But again, you have to balance, like, if you want to be playing Champions League, that's worth a lot. If you want to be, living in London, like, versus, I don't want to call out any of the cities.
I'll say Orlando, just because in Book of Mormon they make fun of Orlando. So we
okay. I love living in Orlando.
As a generic. Okay.
Yes. So of course it is very different. And that's why now with the NWSL getting more and more Bay Area, Boston, it's growing and in the right areas. And I just, that is one way I think that we will be able to compete. And I just think, again, the size of this country, the popularity of the sport, you still have some of the best players, a lot of the best players in the world playing in this league. But of course, a lot of them are also in Europe. So I think that's going to be the challenge in terms of how we have our schedule. Or, I'm going to miss all these games because they're only giving us a 2-week break when I go to the World Cup. Like, that's something maybe European players I'd rather not do that. So I'm going to stay in Europe. So I think, again, the NWSL is very young compared to these other leagues. And I do have optimism that the new commissioner is really listening, because, the players' voices are the ones that we're the ones living it. We're the ones experiencing it, and have players, veterans in this league who just have experienced so much and can really help build this to be a top league for generations to come.
Cary, North Carolina, fortunate to have not caught a stray there. I wanted to ask you, Allie, about the club that you play for, Angel City, because we've referred to it a couple of times as this sort of entity that represents something that's different. And I don't mean to make you cry, but we should tell the audience that it's now entering its second year. Last year was an expansion season. Natalie Portman was the main investor behind it, but solicited all kinds of investment from all over Hollywood and sports and the business world. And Angel City drew, I believe, an average crowd of over 15,000 people for their games.
19,000.
Wow, 19,000, excuse me. At now BMO Stadium in Los Angeles, which is also the home of LAFC. What allowed the club, what makes it different? Why is it that the team draws over 19,000 people? Why is it that this model What is the model and what makes it work?
So one of the most unique things, I think, besides being the largest female-led ownership group in sports, which I think is a big thing to point out, and it makes it very unique, is the 10% sponsorship model, where any sponsor that comes in is committing 10% of that money, and Angel City is committing 10% of that money to go back into the community. And so we go back to this like morality dilemma. Like, Angel City didn't have to do that, but you want to have sponsors that want to put money and, equity, education, and essentials are the three pillars that the club is like part of the mission. And again, usually it's capital. Like, usually the priority is not going to be these other aspects. And I think that is what has really drawn me to this club and feeling so connected, because I've realized that when you play for a purpose or have a purpose bigger than yourself, you actually play better. So I think it's like very related to performance. And when you work for a company that is aligned with your values, like we donated, it's up to, I believe, over 300,000 meals to people in need in Los Angeles. I think it's like 8,000 sports bras to young girls, gender expansive youth in sport, educating so girls and women are able to get into coaching, planting gardens and having green spaces for people to grow their vegetables, having free farmers markets for people in need. These are such amazing initiatives that this club is doing, and it's like by choice. And I think what is interesting with that is like Angel City actually had so many investors wanting to get involved that they were turning people away, because I do think we're at the point now. And again, LA is a unique market. I'm not going to here as a soccer player that has absolutely no experience in business or any education in this, that this would work in any market. But I think that we still like are showing that it is possible. And that's something that people didn't believe. In the crowded market of Los Angeles with these other professional sports teams, 2 men's soccer teams, 2 NBA teams, like this is a very crowded market. And there wasn't a team here for 12 years. So there were a lot of doubters. There are a lot of failed attempts. So for this club to come in and have these initiatives that I think supporters and our fans really identify with, also creating a very, very safe space to watch sport, I think is unfortunately unique. And sport is something that we love so much. And it's a place where you want to be able to forget about hate, but it's not. If you look at what's going on with racism and abuse globally in the game on the men's and the women's side. And I think every Angel City home game is this celebration of diversity and inclusion, women empowerment, the LGBTQ plus community, and just that you can come as you are. We will celebrate you. We will listen to you. We value you. And again, I just think that obviously, I don't think it's a fact that is what people were craving. And again, there's the soccer side. And we do feel pressure to do well, because the better we do, the bigger the platform and the impact that this club will have. If we come last every season, people will stop coming, and the club will look like kind of a charity type thing. And that's not what it is. I think listening to Alexis talk about it and having this male ally who, has reached into his pockets and is using his platform to talk about the club is very helpful. And coming from a guy who's like investing his money and has this background, for him to talk about how big of an investment it is, how good investment. And when he's telling his friends, like, get into this now, like this is really good business. And what Angel City is doing, that is probably one of my favorite parts, is that they're sharing this model with other teams in the NWSL, teams in other leagues and other industries, because we want to make a difference. And I think for me, growing up being Asian American, feeling different and feeling like being different was a bad thing. I think, now I'm going to cry. I think that being part of this club that has done something different, and it's been so positive and so successful and created so much change, is so encouraging for anyone who's like ever been made to feel different. And my favorite story to tell is that, a fan came to me after a game and said that coming to Angel City games empowered her to leave her abusive partner. And I was like, I don't need to play another soccer game. Like, what this club is doing is so powerful. And it's so fulfilling, and it really is so meaningful. And again, it makes me want to play even better soccer and help us win to keep this going and keep this momentum. So I think, there are a lot of reasons why I love the club. And I just think being purpose driven and like really showing that like women's sports, women's soccer is profitable and popular. And it is right now unique, but the whole point is to not be an outlier. It's like to normalize this. So it's a very special club to be a part of.
Yeah. I feel like we've reached the apex of this interview at this point, Chris. I mean, we've made Allie, well, not only
I almost started crying during that answer.
Yeah. I warned you.
We also have kept you much longer than promised, but you have been kind enough to not point it out to us. But Allie, thank you so much for joining us and for talking through all of these different topics. If there's anything else you want to say, a pitch for Australia, New Zealand, you've got the floor. But otherwise, we just thank you for your time today.
Yeah, well, I mean, if anyone has learned anything from this episode, I hope it is to support women and invest in women. So regardless of whether Visit Saudi hops on as a huge sponsor or not, I really hope that everyone who can't go will at least tune in, because I don't know if people realize that just having your TV tuned to that channel or engaging with social media platforms, this is what some of these big organizations like will use as evidence and data to support like if they invest in us or not. So yeah, I really hope that everyone tunes in and supports the World Cup.
And unfortunate for the U.S., despite the fact that it is being played in Australia and New Zealand and the time difference, I believe there are a few games that kick off in American prime time. I think there's like 2 in the group stage and 1 or 2 in the knockout round. So hopefully that leads to a further galvanization and people watch this. And like you say, like engaging with the thing, social media metrics, seeking out a sponsor. It's one of the cool things about women's soccer is that I think people recognize the value, not just in like, all right, I got to go or I got to watch a game, or no, I have to actively invest my time and I guess commercial power as a consumer towards the people that support this thing. And I think a lot of people recognize that.
All right, that'll do it for Meadowlarkers 66 honorary captain.
The Trent Alexander-Arnold episode.
There we go.
Swinging crosses from the right flank.
Thanks, Allie.
Thank you.